Now on TVS, a local issue that's a national controversy, Facing South.
The controversy over fox hunting has reached a new pitch. The sport has never been more popular, yet opposition to it appears stronger than ever. Now there's a new twist to this oldest of disputes. The hunters are being accused of using the law to silence their critics. But is it possible to outwit the anti-hunting lobby? Saturday morning in a Hampshire village, and 40 riders set off for a day's sport. It's a colourful scene, and one that's become part of the English heritage. This is a meeting of the Hampshire Hunt, one of 25 fox hunts in the south. Today is their 50th meet of the season. They've been invited to the village of Monkwood near Petersfield. A local landowner has given permission for the hunt to use his woodland. Villagers turn out in force to welcome them. As far as they're concerned, it's a part of country life. It costs around £300 each year to belong to hunts like this, yet the sport's popularity is growing. But opposition to fox hunting has seen a corresponding increase. In the face of this hostility, the hunters have become concerned about their image, so much so that they've made their own video to put over the positive sides of country sports.
More people enjoy fox hunting in Britain today than at any time in the colourful history of this traditional sport. Many actively take part, while others enjoy watching simply for its spectacle. But even with this increased popularity, hunting is still largely misunderstood and continues to provoke lively discussion on the morality of the matter. And misplaced social jealousy fuels the argument.
The hunting lobby has also produced a leaflet which is used as a teaching aid in some secondary schools.
The importance of that leaflet is that it puts both sides of the picture. We don't need to use propaganda. What we do is we provide the facts, and whether we're talking about adults or whether we're talking about children, we're quite happy for them to make their own minds up when they're given the facts.
The pro-hunting lobby is confident that if its case is presented accurately, it will win the argument. Hunters see the fox as a pest which they control for farmers and other landowners. Hunting with hounds, they believe, is less cruel than other methods which are also legal, such as trapping, snaring, shooting or gassing. But others take a different view. Wildlife photographer Eric Ashby is a leading campaigner against hunting. He runs a fox sanctuary in the New Forest and sees the fox as a much maligned animal, being more a pest killer than a pest itself.
In the New Forest in particular, the fox does probably more good than harm. It keeps down the mice and voles which would injure the trees. It kills the rabbits and squirrels. And on the whole, it's a very good animal to have in the forest.
But the controversy over hunting doesn't centre merely on whether the fox is friend or foe. Passions are greatest over the question of cruelty, and in particular on how the fox is killed. It's what happens in the final moments of a hunt that's caused the most concern. Here in the New Forest, where these pictures were taken, around 7 in 10 of all foxes killed are first dug up after going underground. Terriers are sent down to find the fox. Sometimes the hunt then continues, but more often the fox is shot with a humane killer before being thrown to the hounds. Attempts to film scenes like this are often hindered by hunt supporters. In its video on fox hunting, the British Field Sports Society also shows the work of the terrier men.
Steady, girl, steady.
Hunts employing terrier men say they've been wrongly accused of throwing live foxes to the hounds after they've been dug up. They insist that does not happen. It's strictly against the rules of the Masters of Foxhounds Association. This has been the traditional face of the fox hunting controversy. Saboteurs doing their best to disrupt the hunters at play. People on both sides have been hurt in such clashes. In the last year alone, around 40 hunt saboteurs claim to have been injured by riders or hunt supporters in the south. Among them, 5 in this group of saboteurs we filmed in Chichester.
How often you've been sabotaging this particular hunt, the problems you've been having with police, the problems you've been having with violence from the hunt.
Many saboteurs elsewhere in the region have been convicted of breaches of the peace.
On a regular basis.
David Plumpton, a former master of the New Forest foxhounds, was acquitted by a Crown Court jury in January this year of deliberately wounding a saboteur. He said he was protecting a colleague who'd come under attack. He was one of 3 senior hunt figures in the south to be charged in the last year with offences against saboteurs and acquitted. Those who speak for the hunts also claim some of their members have been injured in clashes, and violence, they say, is escalating.
These are people who call themselves saboteurs. They chose their name for themselves. Sabotage means willful or wanton acts of damage or destruction, and they try to physically interfere with a lawful activity, stop it taking place. And they are becoming increasingly violent in their desperation to stop us doing what we have every lawful right to do.
Growing friction at some hunts has led to police forces, including Sussex and Thames Valley, using helicopters to check on potential trouble spots.
2 weeks ago we had the police helicopter out from Shoreham, which has never come out on that hunt before, and is a sign that things are getting pretty desperate for them.
We've had 3 or 4 incidents with police helicopters. The most recent one was with the old Berkeley Beagles. We'd been out for about 20 minutes, actually on public footpaths. Police helicopter came, circled, dropped right down, and what they were doing, they were actually rounding us up like sheep. The helicopter was then hovering. Police were jumping out with dogs that were inside them. Now, there was 20 saboteurs. All in all, there was about 50 police, 3 police riot vans, 7 dogs.
The police do their best to ensure the demonstrations remain peaceful, but turning out to fox hunts at weekends is a drain on scarce resources.
We take each meet on its merits and we man and deploy accordingly. The problem is an irritant. It's a deployment of police officers that we could well use elsewhere. But nevertheless, we accept, as we do with other sporting events, that there is a legitimate call on police time and police resources, and as such we respond. We have a statutory obligation to keep the peace, and if there is an incident or an event where we have reason to fear that there may be a breach of the peace, then there is a police presence. It's as simple as that.
The day we filmed the Hampshire hunt at Monkwood, 40 saboteurs turned out. Their aim here was to distract the hounds. But was it actually helping the fox?
The hounds are here, and the saboteurs are here, and they're just doing the hollering and shouting. And to my view, they're just defeating their object, because if the poor fox would never stand a chance of getting out, they're more than likely, which has been done, they're driving the fox straight back into the hounds, and he hasn't got a chance.
Later the same day, with the Chiddingfold hunt at Petworth in West Sussex. And a saboteur claims he's been attacked by a supporter of the local fox hunt.
It's a bit bruised, it's a bit sore, but I think I'll live, as I say. Put a bit of ice on it when I get home. I was driving the van round to pick up some hunt sabs who were feeling threatened because there were a load of hunt supporters around them. I turned into the road where I was going to pick them up. The road was blocked by a car, and there was a group of people on the corner. One of the people came over and started asking me whether I had a problem through the window. I ignored him. He pulled the door open and thumped me on the side of the face. I then slammed the door and locked it and drove off.
Police investigated his complaint, but no one has been charged. While there's nothing new in the saboteurs campaign, there's now another front that's opened up in the battle over fox hunting. Hunts across the south are increasingly using a more sophisticated weapon to hit back at their critics. They say their only defence against the tide of misinformation about hunting is the law of libel.
Masters are getting really rather fed up with what's being said about them, and I think that the reason our opponents are saying these things is because they're getting increasingly desperate in their efforts to put out more black propaganda and misrepresent what we do.
In the past year, lawyers acting for a number of hunts have threatened to issue over 40 writs for libel. Many of them have been against people who've written anti-hunt letters to local newspapers. Editors and publishers who've printed them have also been threatened with writs. Most of the cases are centred here in the south. The hunt's leaders defend their stance. They say in every case it's been a blatant libel that couldn't be ignored by them.
There are probably about 11 or 12 actions going on at the moment throughout the country. And the reason why masters are bringing them is not to gag the press or stifle comment about hunting, but simply to stop hunting's opponents from telling outrageous lies about hunts, and in the hope that it'll discourage journalists and editors from publishing these ludicrous claims without first checking on whether or not they're true. We're perfectly happy for anyone who wants to write about hunting, to comment on it. All we ask is that any comment is fair and that any claims are true.
Many of the hunt cases have been handled by solicitor Matthew Knight. He's a partner with Cripps Harris Hall, a law firm in Tunbridge Wells in Kent. He's also a deer hunter, riding with the Quantock Staghounds in Somerset. This amateur film of the hunt, with Mr. Knight on the right, was shot 18 months ago. As a solicitor, Mr. Knight acts for hunt masters and other hunt professionals who believe they've been libelled. Already in the past year, he's achieved successful settlements out of court in at least 9 cases against hunt objectors and newspapers. One of those 9 involved Sandy Arnold, who lives near Winchester. Mr. Arnold is a retired Hampshire police officer. With his wife, he runs a fox sanctuary and a conservationist magazine. After taking legal advice, he settled out of court in respect of a letter of his published in the Southern Evening Echo concerning the New Forest foxhounds. The Echo also settled out of court. Sandy Arnold had to pay £1,400 in damages and costs. £500 of that had to be paid to a charity nominated by the hunt.
I received a letter.
Mr. Arnold also signed an agreed apology, which was published in the Echo.
I entirely accept that the information I received and on which the letter was based was mistaken, and that incident referred to did not occur and would not be permitted to occur. Accordingly, I withdraw the allegation and apologise to the joint masters of the New Forest Hounds for any distress which they have been caused by this disgraceful allegation which I now deeply regret. And 2 days later, I then had another letter, which was very similar to the one I'd had in the first case. In the second letter, it was the huntsman and the whipper-in. And in it, it said they wanted very substantial damages because their work records were questioned.
Mr. Arnold was in no position to pay out any more. 2 months later, he heard through his solicitor that the file was being closed. But there was one proviso.
We reserve all our clients' rights in this regard, and have instructions to pursue our clients' claims if your client in the future either libels or slanders our clients, or indeed otherwise brings himself to their attention.
Now, what they mean by, or indeed otherwise brings himself to their attention, I don't know. What they obviously intend to do is to shut me up.
Another in the New Forest who found herself threatened with libel action was Prudence Appleby. She too wrote a letter to a local weekly paper which was critical of how foxes were killed. Although she maintains her comments were aimed at fox hunting generally, her letter was again alleged to be defamatory. She received a solicitor's letter from Cripps Harris Hall on behalf of the joint masters of the New Forest foxhounds, claiming substantial damages.
The letter came as a terrible shock to both myself and my husband. We couldn't believe it.
Her husband, a retired army barrister, wrote back saying his wife was innocent and hadn't intended to defame anyone. More letters arrived from Cripps Harris Hall. Mrs. Appleby dreaded the postman arriving.
There were about 5 letters in all. They were very horrid. And not only that, you see, they kept saying, if you don't pay up or pay these damages at once, we will serve a writ on you and you will get no further warning. Was this feeling all the time that someone was going to bang on the door with a writ, you know? And what will we do then? We thought, if it gets that far. It was really quite horrifying.
Mrs. Appleby feared she could lose her home if ever the case reached court.
I lost weight. It was traumatic. I'd wake early in the morning and it would be on my mind. And my husband was the same. My husband couldn't even get to sleep.
The Applebys refused to pay any damages, and they objected strongly to the wording of one particular letter from Cripps Harris Hall.
As you and your wife are clearly aware, our clients have been subject to a campaign of vilification and abuse in the media, and illegal harassment, violence and vandalism, in particular directed at them on their hunting days, but also directed at their homes, business premises and elsewhere. Regrettably, your wife has chosen, albeit unwittingly, to identify herself with the third parties responsible for that campaign. They therefore elect to pursue their claims against her unless those claims are settled.
Well, we were absolutely mystified. We never knew there was any campaign of vilification against their clients. We had no idea that this was going on. I don't know what they mean when they say I identified myself with third parties. I don't believe in violence at all.
In October last year, Major General Appleby died of a heart attack while out sailing. Mrs. Appleby has not been told whether the threatened libel case against her is continuing or not. But the editor of the paper which published her letter believes an important principle of press freedom is at stake.
I think the hunt, or the hunts variously, have embarked upon the general policy of chasing the press or anybody else they think they can chase who've said something which could be considered possibly libelous. And by this process, I think they possibly silence criticism. The overall effect of this would be, of course, to make them think very carefully what they published or broadcast in future. I mean, that's an attempt to gag. Well, it's an attempt to gag.
The Hunts reject such a suggestion. They argue that far from trying to gag anybody, all they want to do is prevent people from making unfounded and defamatory allegations against hunts and huntsmen.
The libel is a libel, and it doesn't matter whether it's committed by an old lady or a young man. And if Masters taking these actions makes our opponents have a care about what they write about us, then we should be very happy about it. It's really down to them to think what they're saying before they dash off letters to newspapers or make allegations about us.
However, the Hunters have certainly overstepped the mark in pursuing their critics in one case we've investigated. Inventor and businessman Alistair Kilburn lives in the New Forest, and last summer, after hounds had invaded his garden 3 times in as many weeks, he appeared in the comment programme on Channel 4.
Some weeks ago, the New Forest foxhounds tore across this garden and ran their quarry to earth in this active badger set. Every year, we watch new badger cubs playing at our feet in this same place. Because this is a private garden, the fleeing fox could not, on this occasion, be dug up and thrown to the hounds. The next day, the hunt sent a joint master to apologize for the intrusion, and it was with a touching sense of irony that a moment after he left, we spotted a fox sunning herself on a grassy bank just yards from the area churned up by dozens of hounds the day before.
A week after that broadcast, Alistair Kilburn heard that both he and Channel 4 were being accused of libel by the joint masters of the New Forest foxhounds. A letter arrived on their behalf from Matthew Knight's firm, Cripps Harris Hall.
I was astonished that Channel 4 contacted me and said that they'd had a very strong letter from a firm of solicitors complaining about what they called a disgraceful and groundless allegation that I'd made in the broadcast. I'd have been puzzled by that, except that there was another helpful paragraph in the letter, and if I may, I'll read it to you because it says exactly what they were accusing me of. They say here, the defamatory material of which our clients principally complain is the allegation that our clients, their servants or their agents, have in the past dug up badgers, or badger pups, whatever they are, and have thrown the illegally captured badgers impliedly alive to our clients' hounds, and that they will in the future so do. Well, I don't know if you heard me say that, but I didn't.
Mr. Kilburn received a second letter from the same solicitors alleging he'd made other defamatory statements in the programme. But he strenuously denies this and says he won't be put off campaigning against fox hunting.
The Hunt is an organisation that acts for a minority of people and depends on really the apathy of the majority and the free passage over other people's land. And it does seem odd to me that they should adopt the role of schoolyard bully to maintain these privileges.
Some anti-hunt campaigners feel so strongly that even the risk of court action hasn't deterred them from speaking out. At her home in Alton in Hampshire, another member of the public has been accused of libel. She too had written to a newspaper. On the basis of local press reports, Daphne BIRKBY criticised the Isle of Wight hunt for chasing a vixen through the grounds of an old people's home. She's chosen to ignore the lawyer's letter she received. Instead, she's continuing her campaign to get fox hunting banned. Her latest letter, complaining about the chase of a fox again on the Isle of Wight, was published in the Alton Herald last month. Far from being put off by the legal threats, Mrs. BIRKBY chose to send a copy of the published letter to Matthew Knight of Cripps Harris Hall with a compliment slip.
By sending this letter, I'd like Mr. Knight and anybody else who might be concerned with that to know that I and thousands of others like us will carry on. We will not be gagged. I shall carry on with the letter writing, I shall carry on lobbying MPs, and I shall keep on informing people just how much the fox is persecuted. I shall carry on until the fox gets protection.
Mrs. BIRKBY's stance is supported by a number of anti-hunt groups who believe the litigation represents a gross overreaction.
Well, I think these legal threats have shown that they are getting desperate. They can't sustain the debate in a public forum. They're losing debates in letters columns, and this is another tactic to shut people up. There have been people who, of course, have been quite frightened and disturbed by these threats. The letters are official letters. They're looking for damages and costs, and people immediately start thinking of their house possibly being lost in a very expensive libel action.
The Hunts themselves say they're pleased with the service provided by their legal advisors, and they utterly reject any idea that they're using bully boy tactics.
Well, that's absolute nonsense, and I think that's just a smokescreen to try to detract from the fact that they have libelled us. We're anything but bully boys, but we are concerned with our own good names and reputations, and we're simply not prepared to have them dragged through the dirt.
Whatever the rights and wrongs of these legal disputes, the fox hunters have a battle on their hands to win over public opinion. Southern Newspapers has recently given prominence to a poll it's run on hunting. Almost 1,500 readers took part, and all but 61 wanted it banned outright. The poll seems to suggest that the Hunt's use of the libel laws has done nothing to erode a widespread hostility to fox hunting. Each side feels passionately that it's in the right, but it's clear that the hunting lobby must stay on the offensive if it wants to protect this most English of pursuits.
On the Record in half an hour on BBC One looks at Conservative plans to
Today we investigate the impact on the British countryside of open-cast coal mining. It's important to the economy, but has it been allowed to get out of control? Also, why a county council is being urged by one of its committees to silence the guns of the wild fowlers. First, though, let's get up to date with all the latest happenings on the rural news front.
Reports that the government is reconsidering its opposition to commercial whaling have infuriated Greenpeace and the RSPCA. Greenpeace say overwhelming public opinion demands that the British government clarifies its position and supports a permanent ban. The RSPCA have distributed documents to members of Parliament showing how cruel they believe whaling to be.
The widespread damage caused by birds such as magpies, crows and pigeons may not be controllable in future. The European Commission is considering making Britain protect these birds, which are designated as pests, during their breeding season. The British Association for Shooting and Conservation say attempting to standardise these sorts of regulations for countries as varied as Britain and Greece is lunacy.
New regulations for controlling pollution from silage, slurry and agricultural fuel oil are to come into force from September. The Country Landowners Association say in trying to recoup their costs, the National Rivers Authority have rushed their plans through without doing their homework, and their proposed charges are unfair.
This is the traditional way of getting coal from just beneath the surface, by drift mining. Long corridors just a few metres beneath the fields lead to the coal face. And this drift mine at the North of England Open Air Museum at Beamish has been preserved just as it was a century ago. In the old days, of course, it was hard and dangerous work. But as far as the countryside was concerned, there's one big advantage. From above the ground, you just can't see it. But advances in machinery and technology meant it was possible to scrape away the top of the land, to excavate for coal with open cast mining. It was cheaper and easier to work, but it's certainly taken its toll on the appearance of the countryside. Over the past few years, there's been a massive expansion in open casting. Many parts of Britain have coal just under the ground. The industry argue it's the way to beat cheap imports, and with privatisation on the horizon for British coal, competitiveness is the name of the game. But county planners around the country have now become so worried about the planning rules for open cast mines that on Friday they met to plan a campaign aimed at getting the government to tighten up on its protection of the countryside. One area they're worried about is just 2 miles away from this museum in County Durham. It's a community that's already seen much of its countryside ripped up by open casting. There's now little left that's been untouched. Michael Colley has been investigating.
The village of Craghead, 7 miles outside Durham, has seen some changes over the years. Once upon a time, Craghead Colliery employed hundreds of men, thousands over the time it was open. But in the 1960s, the pit closed, and as one resident put it to me, Craghead died. Unemployment is high, and car ownership is low. And that means having countryside nearby is very important. Well, the news now is that mining might return. Open cast mining that'll take not just the coal, but the countryside as well.
This area, threatened by a private mining company, is enjoyed by locals like Dorothy Beckwith.
It's so open. I mean, we can go out the house and see rabbits running across the field and birds. In fact, the birds wake us up in the morning, you know, and it's as near the country, I think, that we would ever be able to afford, put it that way, you know, where we live up there. And we just love it here, we really do.
So what did you think when you heard there was an application in for an open cast mine here?
Horror, absolute horror. I mean, the heart was took out the village when the pits closed. Obviously, the men folk in the village, a lot of them still out of work. A lot of pleasure they get is walking around these fields, these walks, picking mushrooms, seeing the wildlife, and it's just going to be destroying for the village.
What makes it worse is there's little natural countryside left.
It is one of the few remaining areas that's untouched. So if you look over there, you can see undulations, changes in levels, hedgerows, natural hedgerows. All those have been destroyed in that area over there, which has been open cast already.
But that area has been reclaimed.
Oh, it's been reclaimed in a totally bland fashion. The area directly behind, just under the hill, was finished 9 years ago. And as you can see, the whole area is absolutely flat. It is featureless. It could be anywhere. It certainly isn't Durham.
Durham County Council have in fact already turned down the application because of the cumulative effect on the countryside of mining around that area. But will their decision make any difference? Recently, private contractors have been remarkably successful in appeals to the Department of the Environment. In the mid-80s, the government approved half the land referred to them. By the late 80s, it was 75%. Come 1990, the successful appeal rate hit 90%.
Across the whole of the nation, since 1988, mineral planning authorities themselves have approved about 12 square miles of land for open cast coal working. But on top of that, central government on appeal has approved a further 8 square miles, which adds up to a total of 20, as distinct from the 12 square miles which local planning authorities thought was appropriate.
National statistics like that are made up of lost local battles. For example, Stannington in Northumberland has a mine approved only after a private operator appealed to central government.
At this particular site, the County Council refused permission because of the effects on a main tourist network and the impact on a very greenfield and attractive site. Unfortunately, we were overturned by a government inspector who stated that the site would not be intrusive and could not be seen from the main road. Now, clearly our experience is the inspector was wholly wrong, and really his decision was quite deplorable.
Why do you think that decision was made? Was it simply a mistake, or was there more beneath the surface than that?
We feel concerned that a government document, guidance document issued 3 years ago, unfairly puts the emphasis on production and doesn't stress environmental concerns. Previous situation where there was a balance has been completely lost, and now open cast operators are being given a double presumption in their favour.
And this is the document the argument's all about. Some people think it's fair because it recognises the need to protect the environment. Others say it favours the developers because it does emphasise the need for coal in the national interest. What's now being called for is a change of emphasis in the guidelines that would affect private companies as well as the largest operator, British Coal.
But digging a hole in the ground and mining coal is only one part of the story. What planners have to take into account is what the Department of the Environment guidance notes call restoration and aftercare. Where I'm standing now, just outside Sheffield, used to be an open cast mine, yielding some 2 million tonnes of coal. What it is now is rather
and against saboteurs.
The police took a much more positive action against people who disrupted the hunt. Come on. But once the saboteurs realised that the law was going to prevail, they stopped. They wouldn't come out with us anymore. They went with other hunts where the policing was going to be less effective.
But the police methods so admired by Jeremy Whaley are attacked by those like Jane Clukers who've been on the receiving end. They say police went beyond their rights by stopping, searching and arresting them. Jane Clukers runs a college bookshop in Bognor and campaigns for the protection of badgers. During the hunting season, she checks that the hunt does not disturb badger sets. Today, Jane Clukers is out at the Chiddingfold hunt. But a year ago, on her way to the same hunt, her car was stopped by police. She was told that if she didn't leave the area, she could be arrested for obstructing a police officer. But she returned to the area on foot and was arrested. She was taken to Chichester Police Station in a riot van, and detained in a cell from 9:30 in the morning to 7 in the evening.
It was the first time I'd ever been arrested. It was the first time I'd ever had experience of being inside police cells, and for the first time to experience 10 hours of what I felt was sheer hell.
Jane Clukers was charged with disorderly behaviour for blowing a hunting horn. The charge was later dropped. But magistrates did convict her of obstructing a police officer. She appealed and in May this year was acquitted.
I fought the appeal mainly because I knew I was in the right. There was no reason for me to have been arrested in the beginning. Everybody has a right to go to hunt meetings and to demonstrate. I was there purely for the purpose of checking my badger sets.
Julie Roxburgh, who campaigns against vivisection, and her husband Edwin, a music lecturer, were also stopped by police in September last year on their way to a meeting of the Chiddingfold Hunt.
We noticed a police van slewed across the road. The saboteur's car in front of us had to stop. We stopped behind that, and we noticed a police officer walk up to the young saboteur's car, and a moment later they were all out and arrested.
The Roxburghs then got out of their car to ask the police why the saboteurs had been arrested. They also wanted to know about a photographer who was there.
There was a cameraman, and I didn't know who he was, and I just couldn't understand why at 6 in the morning somebody was standing there photographing, and young Sam's being arrested. He identified himself by pointing to his badge, and I nipped down to look at it. I had not reading specs. He pulled back and shouted, "Assault."
I was just devastated by this. I mean, my husband hadn't touched him or done anything wrong, and I turned on the photographer and I said, "Well, you're a fascist," and at which point I was arrested.
The Roxburghs were detained in police cells for 10 hours. Edwin Roxburgh was charged with disorderly behaviour and criminal damage to a police badge. 5 months later, the charges were dropped. Instead, he was bound over to keep the peace. He's now appealing. Julie Roxburgh was convicted of disorderly conduct.
It is not illegal to go hunting, and it is not illegal to be a hunt saboteur. Everything that I do is perfectly within the law. If there were a law which said it is illegal to sabotage a hunt, then I would be breaking the law. But I'm not breaking the law, and I consider that it is not within the rights of the police to stop me from doing something which is my legal right to do.
Others arrested by Sussex police last season are now suing the force for wrongful arrest and false imprisonment. These are among 37 civil actions being brought by around 85 hunt demonstrators against southern police forces. Sussex police refuse to discuss individual cases, but they say their actions were based on policing precedents set during civil disturbances in the 80s.
This policy that we followed last season was actually based on very sound case law, for example, which arose out of the miners' dispute, when it was quite clearly decided that it was proper action for police to stop people from moving into a particular area where there was clear evidence to show that their presence in that area would escalate a breach of the peace.
Sussex isn't the only force that's run into problems. On October the 17th this year, 9 saboteurs suing the Chief Constable of Thames Valley were awarded a total of £12,000 damages and an estimated £60,000 in costs for unlawful arrest and false imprisonment. It followed a meet of the old Berkeley Beagles hare hunt in Buckinghamshire in November 1989. The court heard that up to 50 police with vehicles, dogs and a helicopter were involved. 21 saboteurs were arrested and 9 detained in police cells. Eric Staples, a social worker living at the time in Swanley, Kent, was pursued by the helicopter.
I started to run, and at that point the helicopter turned and proceeded to chase me for about 8 minutes, coming within 4 feet of my head, and at one point caused me to be blown into a ditch by the force of its propellers. I was scared to death, to be quite honest. I'd been out sabotaging hunts for 3 years before that, and had never had such a frightening experience. I'd never hardly come across police officers, certainly not in large numbers, and certainly not using helicopters and dogs, etc.
When questioned about the outcome of the case, the Deputy Chief Constable said the arrests were necessary to prevent breaches of the peace.
The law, where hunts are concerned, is very, very complicated. Quite clearly, the court has been considering this issue for something like 3 weeks. Our officers have to make split decisions. So it's very, very difficult. There is no clear-cut law regarding hunts and indeed breach of peace.
Some claims against the police have been settled out of court. Hampshire police paid £500 this year to Aubrey Thomas, who alleged he had been wrongly arrested at a meet of the Meon Valley Beagles. A public order charge against him was later dropped.
So what I'd like you to do now is just to fix your eyes onto the dragon that's on the box there. Okay. And I'd like
Simon Boyd, a hypnotherapist, received a £1,500 out-of-court payment from Kent Police. He was arrested at a meet of the Old Surrey and Burstow hunt for an alleged assault. He was detained in a police car until the victim said it was a case of mistaken identity.
of the sounds that are around you in this room. I was led out of the car and told I was being de-arrested. And then approximately 30 seconds later, a higher ranking officer came along and said, don't de-arrest him, nick him again. Each day.
Simon Boyd was then re-arrested to prevent a possible breach of the peace and held in a police van until late afternoon.
Change, which is comfortable. The door was then opened, and standing outside was a policeman with a red coat huntsman who simply pointed in and said, that's the one, he did it. So do that now, nice and slowly. I didn't know what that was about until I was actually at the police station, where they informed me that this person had a brick, half a brick, thrown at him on his horse, which had caused him to actually fall off his horse onto the ground. So that charge was actually quite a serious one.
When the case came to court, the prosecution withdrew the charge of assault as soon as he pleaded not guilty.
That's right. To be wide awake.
Kent police say they'd had doubts about the prosecution case several days before the hearing, but the Assistant Chief Constable insists the action taken by the officer at the scene was perfectly proper.
We felt the officer at the time had a very difficult job to deal with, dealing with two sides equally committed in their views on animal and human rights. He acted reasonably, given the allegations of assault that were passed to him. It's difficult to see how he could have responded in any other way. I fully understand Mr. Boyd's feelings. It must have been a very frustrating afternoon for him, and certainly the sum of £1,500 does reflect our concern for Mr. Boyd's circumstances on that day. It also reflects our overall judgment of the incident.
Other cases elsewhere have been more serious. Peter White regularly demonstrates against hunting. This year he was one of 6 saboteurs awarded a total out-of-court settlement by Dorset Police of £14,000 plus costs. The 6 were arrested after an explosion at a saddlery belonging to a member of the South Dorset Foxhounds. Only the weekend before, they'd been sabotaging a meeting of the same hunt, and their car had been overturned by hunt supporters. Some days later, police arrived at Peter White's home with a search warrant. He was taken in for questioning and told for the first time about the bomb at the saddlery.
They accused me of planting this bomb. They said that I put this bomb in a rucksack, stuck it on my back, got onto my motorbike and drove all the way from Hampshire to Dorset, planted this bomb and come back to where I live within 2 hours. The simple fact there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever of this bomb being planted by myself or any of the other colleagues.
Peter White and the other saboteurs were held for up to 14 hours while their homes were searched. Nothing incriminating was found, and all were released without charge. Dorset Police said the officers had acted in good faith, but agreed that the arrests were without justification. Some hunt supporters say the large number of actions brought against police forces in the south are an orchestrated campaign to undermine the police.
The saboteurs are very sophisticated people. They're appealing against their convictions. They're suing chief constables for false arrest, for unlawful imprisonment. Their hope is that the police will become demoralised or unwilling to act and won't take action against the saboteurs in future, which will give them free rein to do more or less what they like.
Sir, the hunt's not damaged, but it's up the top, and they've gone along to the top lodge gate.
But some forces, like Sussex, are changing the way they police hunts, partly as a result of their failure to secure sufficient convictions in the courts.
No, I haven't seen any.
Where are they going to now, then? Where are they
Difficult to say. They're heading down across countries.
We are now concentrating much more on looking to substantive offences being committed and dealing with substantive offences. It does cause us problems. I can't deny that. It is simpler in terms of controlling the situation to be able to intervene before something gets out of hand. But if we just carried on what we did last season, it would be foolish, because there have been cases gone to court locally which have said, look, that was wrong.
Peter Thornton, a barrister and expert in public order law, believes part of the difficulty lies in the vagueness of the laws which allow arrests under the Public Order Act.
There is, within this area of hunt and hunt protest, a grey area of the law. What I would really like to see is something which is simple and readable for those who may come in conflict with the law, and so that people are punished and charged for that which is clear, something like criminal damage or assault, or the threat of damage or assault. That's clear. Nothing vague about somebody likely to be harassed, alarmed or distressed.
Many forces say they're in an impossible position, criticised by the saboteurs for being overzealous and by the hunt for not doing enough to stop the saboteurs interfering. Some senior officers say policing alone cannot resolve the conflict.
Policing is about making sure that two opposing factions working within the law are allowed to do so. So to resolve the underlying problem of the conflict is something that has to be addressed outside of policing circles.
5 o'clock and the Chiddingfold hunt packs up. The saboteurs claim they've had a good day.
Come on, Jeremy! Come on, Jeremy!
We've been fairly effective today. We've been with the hunt most of the day. They haven't killed anything as far as we know.
I mean, it was just total anarchy. Saboteurs running all over the place, doing what they like with the hounds. It appears to me there's one law for the hunt and no law for the saboteurs.
We're going to stay here until he comes out.
I can't see what more I can do. I've appealed for help, I've begged for help. It's up to the law now.
What do you think that's going to mean for your hunt this season if the policing continues that way?
Well, how long can anybody put up with... No, I've had enough. I've had enough.
There have been no arrests, but the hunt believes violence and lawlessness could soon escalate. The saboteurs vow to keep up their campaign until hunting is banned, but the hunt is determined to carry on against increasing odds. The conflict looked set to continue.